Tasha sat quietly in seat 3B of the first-class cabin, her heart pounding even as she wore a composed, almost proud expression. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting shimmering patterns across her pale skin. In her hand, she held the crisp, embossed boarding pass, her ticket not just to a flight, but to an entirely new chapter in her life. This journey was more than a simple trip from her hometown to a storied European city. It marked the beginning of something far greater. For months, Tasha had devoted herself to studying a foreign language, immersing herself in Western culture, and nurturing the dream of studying abroad. Now, surrounded by plush, cream-colored leather seats, soft down blankets embroidered with the airline's logo, and the quiet hum of attentive service, she felt keenly the contrast between her past and the promise of her future. When the flight attendant welcomed her aboard, Tasha returned a gentle, polite smile, though her eyes shone with excitement and a touch of nerves. Across the aisle, Mrs. Smith, a slender, silver-haired woman, offered an encouraging nod that seemed to say, "You'll be fine." Next to her, a middle-aged white couple exchanged a supportive glance and smiled warmly at Tasha. They spoke no words, but the brief connection through their eyes gave the 16-year-old courage. Tasha wasn't some spoiled rich kid entitled to first class. Her parents were ordinary middle school teachers who had taught her the value of hard work and self-reliance. She had poured her heart into scientific research projects at school, dreaming of one day contributing to environmental science at a top university abroad. Each test, each lab notebook, every regional science competition, she'd tackled them all with relentless determination. This first-class ticket was the tangible reward for her year-long effort. As the aircraft began to taxi, the gentle vibrations under her seat reminded Tasha that everything was real. She bent down to check the small backpack at her feet, where she'd stashed her passport, notebooks, and a well-worn dark green journal filled with memories, scribbled study plans, essay drafts, and photos of friends who'd encouraged her. She closed the journal with a soft click and slipped it into the seat pocket in front of her. Outside the window, the sky was a flawless expanse of blue, dotted with puffy white clouds. Tasha inhaled deeply, imagining herself standing atop rugged cliffs with salty sea breezes ruffling her hair, or surveying a forest of whispering pines from a mountaintop vista. The feeling was intoxicating, a heady blend of freedom and hope. From across the aisle came Mrs. Smith's gentle voice. "Are you headed off to study, dear?" Her tone was warm and comforting. Tasha nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, I'm going to study and do research." Mrs. Smith smiled, tapping her fingernail lightly on the fold-down tray. "That's wonderful. It can get lonely being far from home, but when you feel most weary, let your determination carry you through." The man and the white couple behind leaned forward. "We've traveled overseas on business a few times," he offered. "At first, everything feels strange, but you get used to it, and before long you focus on your goals and forget the rest." His wife added, "Remember to keep hydrated and rest whenever you can. When you arrive, everything will seem different, but keep your mind steady and believe in yourself." Their words built an invisible foundation beneath Tasha's confidence. She realized she wasn't alone, even among strangers. She lifted her own smile in return, then turned her gaze back to the clouds. The engines roared to life, and Tasha felt the plane lift smoothly into the sky. Each pulse of the engines stirred her excitement. She was leaving her comfort zone and flying toward her dreams. In this insulated haven of premium service, where a breakfast menu offered crispy toast with strawberry preserves, freshly blended juices, and perfectly steamed eggs, she felt genuinely valued. Around her, other passengers glanced briefly at the teenage girl with golden hair and clear, wide eyes. Some whispered, "She's traveling alone?" Or, "How brave of her." None judged, all seemed kindly curious. For Tasha, Experiencing that courtesy on her first solo flight was heartening. She slipped on noise-canceling headphones, the drone of the engines receding beneath a gentle piano melody. Eyes closed, she luxuriated in these last peaceful moments before the intensity of study began. In her mind's eye, she pictured dusty university lecture halls filled with towering bookshelves, where she would spend hours poring over scholarly texts. She imagined meeting eminent professors who would inspire groundbreaking research, collecting soil samples by riversides to test carbon levels, and making her own small contribution to protecting the planet. In that reverie, Tasha vowed to herself, "I will not give up. I will be strong like wildflowers pushing through rocky soil." She opened her eyes to the pale blue sky again, determination etched on her youthful face. High above the earth, sunlight fractured by thin clouds painted floral patterns on the cabin windows, like an auspicious sign for her journey. Below, the patchwork of fields and rivers gleamed like silver ribbons. Tasha peered down, awestruck by the scale of the world beneath her. She felt small, yet unprecedentedly empowered. Mrs. Smith's hand waved gently to remind her that all was well, and the couple offered her refreshments as a silent toast to her endeavor. Small gestures, but for a young traveler, adrift in a sea of strangers, they felt like the warmest hospitality imaginable. The fastened seatbelt chime brought Tasha back to the present. She snapped her safety belt into place and straightened, determined. She gave a brief nod to the flight attendant, her resolve visibly steeled. She was no longer the anxious girl in 3B, but a young warrior charging toward knowledge, aspiration, and hope. Tasha reached for her water glass and took a steady sip, gathering every ounce of courage. Her parents had scraped together every penny for this trip, believing in her talent and work ethic. She felt a quiet pride. She deserved this opportunity, and she would not fail them. Drifting among the clouds, she hummed along with the music in her headphones, a soft lullaby before the symphony of her future. The world outside was boundless, and she was on the cusp of discovery. Thus began the story of Tasha, the 16-year-old white girl in seat 3B, journeying in first class with her heart full of dreams. In her mind, she soared higher than the airplane, convinced that every traveler, no matter their background, has the right to pursue their aspirations. And so, her grand adventure was underway. Mrs. Parker's polished leather shoes clicked decisively against the narrow aisle floor as she strode into the first-class cabin, her posture rigid, shoulders squared. A hush fell over the passengers, as though the cabin itself had braced for impact. Tasha looked up from her neatly folded journal, startled by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The ray, framed in the soft pool of overhead lighting, stood Ms. Parker, the airline's most senior flight attendant, known for her impeccable uniform and unyielding adherence to protocol. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe bun. Her crisp white shirt and tailored navy blazer bore the subtle but unmistakable insignia of authority. Ms. Parker paused before row 3, where Tasha sat clutching her boarding pass, her lips pressed into a thin line as she surveyed the teenager. "Young lady," she began, her voice calm but cold, carrying across the cushioned seats like a blade through silk. "I'm going to need you to relinquish this seat." She gestured toward the back of the cabin with a single, imperious sweep of her hand. Tasha's heart lodged in her throat. Her first thought was that perhaps she'd misunderstood. Maybe Miss Parker was referring to a different passenger, or there had been some mix-up. She raised her gaze and forced a polite smile. "My boarding pass is valid for seat 3B, ma'am," she said, voice trembling just a fraction. She held out the small slip of paper for inspection. Without taking her eyes off Tasha, Ms. Parker lifted her hand and waved it slightly, as though brushing away an insect. "I'm aware of your ticket," she replied, tone clipped. "Nevertheless, I need you to move." She reached into her blazer pocket and produced a handheld device. an electronic scanner that glowed with a soft blue light. She ran the scanner over the boarding pass in Tasha's hand, its light flickering across the holographic seal. Then she frowned, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "Ticket valid," she muttered under her breath. Tasha's breath caught. She glanced at Mrs. Smith, hoping for an ally, but the older woman sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, offering only a sympathetic tilt of the head. The middle-aged couple behind Mrs. Smith exchanged a quick look. Their eyes betrayed pity, but they remained silent. Ms. Parker folded the scanner into her pocket and leveled her gaze on Tasha once more. "Seat 3B is reserved," she said, voice suddenly firmer. "Please collect your belongings and proceed to the rear cabin." "But, ma'am," Tasha managed, her voice small. "This is my seat. My boarding pass." She held it out again, pinching it between thumb and forefinger so that Ms. Parker could see the embossed seat number. Ms. Parker did not take it. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only Tasha could hear. "You need to move back, young lady. I assure you this is not up for discussion." Tasha shook her head, her golden hair brushing her shoulder. "I'm sorry, but I can't. My ticket is first class." She felt a spark of indignation flutter in her chest. She had worked so hard to earn every privilege she had. To have them summarily dismissed felt like a personal attack. Passengers in the surrounding seats turned their heads, curiosity mixing with confusion. A gentleman in a charcoal suit leaned forward, his brow furrowed. A woman in a silk scarf clutched her purse straps tighter. There was tension in the air, but no one spoke. The unspoken rule of first-class etiquette, never make a scene, pressed on every pair of lips. Ms. Parker's expression remained impassive. She raised her chin and spoke as though delivering a routine announcement. "Miss Tasha," she said, using the last name Tasha had printed on her boarding pass, "please move to seat 12A immediately." Tasha's hands trembled as she folded her journal and slipped it into her backpack. She shot a helpless glance at Mrs. Smith. "Excuse me," she whispered, as softly as the rustle of the seatbelt sign. "Can someone help me?" No one did. The cabin's polite silence felt suffocating. Tasha slid out of 3B, the plush leather cool against her palm, and walked down the aisle, as Miss Parker watched, arms crossed. The other first-class passengers pretended not to notice. A few even offered small, apologetic smiles, but their eyes refused to meet hers. As Tasha passed each row, she felt the weight of their stares like a physical force. She saw the couple in 1A and 1C look away. A man in 2D glanced at his watch. A woman in 2F actively turned her gaze toward her window. None would speak. None would stand. It was as though any acknowledgement of the injustice would break the fragile illusion of tranquility they all valued. To reach the dividing curtain between first class and premium economy, she paused, heart pounding. From this vantage, she could see into the back cabin, row upon row of narrower seats, passengers who looked tired from long journeys. Her new seat, 12A, was already occupied by a weary businessman who had been reassigned to coach. She recognized the seat because Ms. Parker had pointed it out when ordering her to move. She swallowed hard and moved the man's briefcase from the seat. He gave her a sympathetic nod but did not offer words. She sat down, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. The soft hum of the air conditioner felt like a taunt, reminding her that she was now in a lesser realm. She clasped her hands on her lap, clutching her ticket for dear life, as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to what was right. Behind her, Ms. Parker re-emerged, walking back toward the front cabin with purposeful strides. She paused at the curtain, looking back at Tasha's bowed head. Then she turned and disappeared among the hushed rows of first-class seats, her presence lingering like a chill. Tasha breathed in and out, trying to steady herself. She felt her eyes sting with the beginnings of tears. She had never imagined her first solo flight would end in humiliation. The soft patter of footsteps and quiet murmur of voices in the economy cabin felt comforting by contrast, as though she had been banished from a gilded cage into a more honest but harsher world. All around her, premium economy passengers tried to resume their own journeys. A man to her right tapped on his phone. A woman further down frowned at her magazine. Two children beside the window whispered, giggling softly. Yet Tasha felt utterly alone. She took out her phone, opened the camera app and stared at the screen. The camera lens reflected her face, pale, wide-eyed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She could capture this moment, proof that what had happened was real. But somehow, she hesitated. She pocketed the phone instead, deciding to bear witness in her memory rather than in a digital record. A flight attendant from the economy cabin approached, offering water. "Are you all right, miss?" she asked, gently, concerned. "Can I get you anything?" Tasha looked up, startled by genuine compassion. She forced a small smile. "Water would be nice," she said. The attendant handed her a cup and lingered for a moment before moving on, giving Tasha space. Tasha sipped slowly, letting the cool liquid steady her nerves. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and a soft chime announced that passengers could adjust their seats. She reclined slightly, testing the mechanism. The seat gave a low hiss and an awkward tilt. She settled into it, trying to find a comfortable position. In the silence that followed, Tasha reflected on what had just happened. Ms. Parker had wielded her authority without explanation. There had been no apology, no justification, only the unspoken assertion that her power superseded any ticket. The injustice stung like a slap, sharper even than any physical blow. Her mind raced with questions. Why her? A 16-year-old girl, seated alone. Was there something about her youth, her appearance, the color of her skin, that made Ms. Parker see her as expendable? The logical part of her mind reminded her that it was protocol. Someone with more status or seniority had perhaps claimed the seat. But that thought provided little comfort. Somewhere beyond the cabin windows, the engines powered the plane higher into the sky. The roar was a reminder that the world continued, indifferent to personal crises. Tasha imagined the sun setting on the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery hues. While inside this steel tube, her own small drama unfolded. She reached for her journal, the dark green hardcover cool beneath her fingers. Opening it, she paused at a margin note from last night. "Stand tall. Your worth is your own." She pressed her thumb against the words, feeling their truth resonate. She would not let this moment define her. Determined, she closed the journal and placed it on the tray table. She took out a pen and began to write. "Today, I learned something about courage and silence." The words formed slowly, reverberating with emotion. She wrote about Ms. Parker's stern face, the scanner that confirmed her ticket but could not confirm her humanity, and the hush that enveloped the cabin like a blanket of indifference. Passengers in the rows around her continued their own routines, reading, napping, chatting quietly. None offered more than a glance, yet in their eyes lingered a hint of discomfort, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had gone awry. As Tasha wrote, she realized that silence could be a force both protective and destructive. It had protected the passengers from conflict, but at the cost of her dignity. She wondered if any of them would feel regret later. By the time she finished her entry, the seatbelt sign dinged on again. A cheerful male attendant came down the aisle, distributing headphones and snack boxes. He paused at Tasha's seat with a professional smile. "Here you go, miss. If there's anything else you need, blankets, pillows, just let me know." "Thank you," Tasha replied softly. She accepted a pair of headphones and opened the snack box. A tiny sandwich, a packet of nuts, and a chocolate square. She took the sandwich and nibbled at it, finding it surprisingly comforting. a small mundane kindness in a world of elevated seats and silent judgments. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign turned off once more, Tasha felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. She would speak up, but not in this moment. She would gather her strength, find her voice. This journey was too important to be derailed by one person's cruelty. Across the aisle, she glanced at the curtain that divided first class from her new seat. Behind that pale barrier, Ms. Parker continued to oversee the luxurious cabin, oblivious to the trail of hurt she had left. But Tasha would not be invisible. She would not remain silent. Raising her head, she met the gaze of her reflection in the dark window for a moment. Eyes steady, jaw firm. Then she turned back to her journal and wrote 2 final words: "I matter." And with that affirmation of her own worth, she tucked the journal away, leaned back in her new seat, and prepared to transform this humiliation into her story of resilience. The flight was far from over, and already Tasha was determined to rewrite the rest of it on her own terms. Tasha pressed herself against the narrow armrest of her economy class seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. The plush leather of 3B had been replaced by a firm, fabric-covered chair that seemed to swallow her up, but she drew in a steadying breath and forced herself to sit upright. Around her, the hum of the cabin was a low drone, undercut by the occasional clink of ice in a drink cart and the soft murmur of passengers settling in. She could feel the weight of every eye in first class on her back, disapproving, uncomfortable, curious, and it pressed down on her like a physical force. Her fingertips trembled slightly as she reached into her backpack and retrieved her phone. The cabin lights above her head cast a cool glow on her pale fingers. She tapped the power button, and the screen flared to life, illuminating the determined set of her jaw. Despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach, her eyes were clear and focused. She unlocked the screen with practiced ease and opened her messaging app. She found the thread she'd started earlier with the number she'd saved under Evelyn Brooks and tapped to open it. The cursor blinked, waiting. Below it, her last message. Sent only moments ago. Read. Becker has forcibly removed me from my valid first-class seat. Now, I'm stuck here in 12A. This is wrong. Please help. Her thumb hovered over the text field as she formulated her next words. Around her, the world of the cabin seemed to slow down. She could almost feel the seconds stretch out, the flight attendant's crisp movements in first class, the muted click of overhead bins closing, the low vibration of the engines shifting throttle. She tapped a few keys. They won't listen to me. They won't let me show my boarding pass. I'm scared. Then she pressed send. Her heart hammered as she watched the 3 dots appear. Evelyn was typing a reply. Time seemed to stop in that instant. The lights on the overhead bins flickered, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. Finally, the message notification popped up. Stay where you are, I'm handling this. Tasha's chest loosened and she let out a long exhale. Relief washed over her in a rush so strong she had to close her eyes against it. She whispered, half to herself, "Thank you, Miss Brooks." Then she tucked the phone back into her pocket and sat motionless, waiting for whatever would come next. 500 miles below, in a high-security operations center at FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., Evelyn Brooks's own world was vibrating with urgency. She sat at a workstation encircled by large screens, tracing air traffic across the country, swirling icons marking flights in real time, data feeds scrolling past with alarming speed, and blinking alerts highlighting anything from turbulence warnings to runway closure. Her office's open-plan layout was a cathedral of glass and polished metal, humming with the low murmur of other controllers and safety analysts. But Evelyn's eye was locked on the text message that had just arrived on her phone. Her knuckles whitened as she read Tasha's plea. A minor, in distress, overpowered by a senior flight attendant despite holding a valid boarding pass. Evelyn knew the protocols. Any allegation of mistreatment, especially involving a minor, had to be escalated immediately. She tapped her phone again. "I've got you. Do not move." Then she set the phone face up on her desk and turned to a direct report, Jonas Vega, who was monitoring the National Flight Operations display. "Jonas," she said, voice low but urgent. "I need a ground stop on Flight 789 out of San Francisco. Status, currently taxiing for departure. Hold engines. I'm invoking an immediate safety review for conduct violating federal regulations regarding passenger treatment." Jonas's brow furrowed as he tapped commands into his console. "Ma'am, that flight's already on its way. Departure roll is programmed." Evelyn cut him off. "I don't care. We have a credible report of a 16-year-old being forcibly removed. That's a potential violation of Title 14 CFR. We must intervene immediately. Notify the flight's operator liaison. Get me their operations control center on the horn, now." Jonas's fingers danced across the keys, and within seconds he brought up the secure communications line to the airline's operations control in Atlanta. On speaker, a crisp, professional voice answered. "FA Operations, this is Delta Ops. Go ahead." Evelyn's tone was firm, every word measured. "Delta Ops, this is Evelyn Brooks, Director of Flight Standards. I require a status check on Flight DL 789. We have an allegation of unauthorized seat reassignment involving a minor passenger, potentially in breach of FAA regulations. Do not depart until further notice. Maintain standby. A full report is forthcoming." A pause followed. Static crackled briefly. Then the voice replied, "Copy that, Ms. Brooks. Flight 789, hold position, will coordinate." Satisfied she had the airline's attention, Evelyn swiveled back to the main screen and issued a terse instruction to her team. "Compile a full passenger manifest. Identify guardians or guardianship records for Tasha, cross-referencing with prior incidents of passenger disputes on this route. I want everything on my desk within 15 minutes." Her deputy, a young analyst named Priya Patel, nodded and tapped furiously to pull passenger data and historic logs. Another colleague, specialist in in-flight incident protocols, forwarded documents outlining the rights of minors traveling alone, legal precedents, and the airline's own policy, which explicitly forbade forcing a minor out of their assigned seat without parental consent or a law enforcement directive. Evelyn stood, straightened her tailored blazer, and strode to the center of the room. She paused, looking out over the bank of workstations, each manned by experts focused on their monitors. "Attention team," she announced in a calm but authoritative voice. "We have a situation on DL 789. A minor's safety and dignity are at risk. I want continuous monitoring until this resolves. Errors will not be tolerated. Bring me updates at 10-minute intervals." As she returned to her desk, her phone buzzed again. She glanced, a brief acknowledgement from Jonas. "Delta Ops confirms hold?" And a thumbs-up emoji from Ms. Parker's app. No, that was a misread. It was actually her own assistant confirming she'd informed the FAA Administrator's office. Evelyn tapped her phone. "Thanks. Stand by for next steps." Then she allowed herself a single, controlled breath. This was why she had accepted the role of safety director, to ensure the skies were not just safe mechanically, but also safe for every passenger's dignity. She started drafting the official memorandum she would need to file. Subject: Emergency Safety Directive, Passenger Misconduct/Staff Misconduct. The document would later become part of the public record, a testament that no airline employee, no matter how senior, could override a federal regulation or treat a child unjustly. Back on the plane, Tasha sat with her back pressed against the window wall of the premium economy cabin. She tried to calm her heartbeat as she pictured the shifting patterns of clouds outside. She tapped her fingers on her tray table, the rhythm syncing with the distant hum of the engines, until the sudden shriek of a scratchy intercom voice startled her. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot's voice crackled over the cabin speakers. This is your captain speaking. Due to operational requirements, we will be returning to the gate. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We apologize for the inconvenience and will keep you informed. Gasps rippled through economy class. Tasha's heart jumped. She looked up and saw other passengers swapping worried glances. The man next to her murmured, "What's happening? We were about to take off." The mother shushed her child, confusion coloring her voice. Tasha closed her eyes. She felt a small surge of vindication. Someone was intervening on her behalf. She reached into her pocket and retrieved her phone, opening the message thread. Evelyn's brief instruction glowed on the screen. "Stay there. I'm handling this." No embellishments, just the promise of action. She allowed herself a small, private smile. She typed back a simple reply, "Thank you." Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket, folding her hands over her boarding pass in a gesture of silent solidarity with herself. Around her, flight attendants hurried down the aisle, checking cabins and securing loose items. The same stern Ms. Parker who had forced her out of 3B now stood behind the curtain, consulting with the purser in hushed tones. Their rigid posture gave way to something more worried, anxious glances at their wristwatches and the aisle. A young flight attendant in economy class approached Tasha's row, offering water and a sympathetic gaze. "Miss, is everything all right?" she asked gently, her voice low enough that only Tasha could hear. Tasha met her eyes and nodded. "Yes, thank you," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. The attendant hesitated, then asked quietly, "Would you like to move to a bulkhead seat maybe? Or even first class once they sort this out?" Her voice was kind, lacking the superiority Tasha had encountered moments before. Tasha managed a small laugh, more relieved than amused. "I'm fine here," she said. "Please, thank you." The attendant smiled and moved on. Tasha watched her go, her resolve hardening. She closed her eyes, feeling the aircraft make its gentle turn back toward the terminal. Minutes later, the cabin door hissed open as ground staff approached to guide the plane in. The engines wound down and seatbelt lights flicked on. A hush settled over the cabin. Tasha felt her hands go cold with anticipation. Somewhere behind her, Ms. Parker appeared in the curtain's gap, her composure more controlled now, though her lips were pressed in a tight line. She eyed Tasha for a moment, as if registering the teenager's calm confidence, then turned away abruptly. Tasha sat very still as the aircraft came to a complete stop. The captain's voice crackled again. "We will be holding here on the tarmac for a short time while we coordinate with FAA officials. Thank you for your patience." Acceptance proceedings. Tasha allowed herself one deep breath and exhaled. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her dark green journal. She opened to a blank page and wrote, "Today I learned that speaking up, even in silence, can move mountains." A few rows back, an older man in a tweed jacket glanced at her journal and nodded approvingly, as though he understood exactly what she'd written. Tasha closed the journal and set it on her tray table. Her mind was calm, clear. She had done the right thing. She had spoken through the text message, and now the federal authorities were intervening. In a small victory of dignity over silence, she felt the beginning of real change. The cabin remained still, the engines off. The door opened to a tarmac alive with activity, and in that suspended moment, Tasha knew that no matter what happened next, she had reclaimed her power, and no one could take it away. Captain Monroe sat rigidly in the flight deck, staring at the glowing strip on his console that blinked with an amber warning, "Hold position, FAA directive." His gloved hand hovered over the radio microphone as the terse voice of the FAA Operations Center crackled through the speaker. "Delta Ops." The captain's voice was calm but firm. "Delta Ops, this is Captain Monroe of Flight 789. You're holding us for departure? A brief pause, then the crisp response. Yes, Captain. We have received an emergency safety directive from the FAA. Your flight is to remain at the gate. Do not push back. A ground investigation will follow regarding an unresolved passenger dispute involving a minor. Please acknowledge. Monroe's mind raced. He glanced at First Officer Chen, whose eyes were wide with surprise. We're held here, Monroe repeated. FAA wants an investigation before departure. He tapped the intercom switch. Cabin crew, this is the flight deck. Please stand by. We've been instructed to remain at the gate pending further notice from the FAA. An investigation is underway. Down the aisle, Ms. Parker froze in mid-stride as she saw flight attendants stop what they were doing. The normally serene cabin suddenly hummed with tension. Her chest tightened as her mind replayed the text message string she had intercepted earlier, one that Tasha Brooks had sent to Evelyn, the FAA director. She had been so careful to conceal her own indignation, her own breach of protocol. Now, the entire operation was on the brink of unraveling. Passengers turned to look at one another in confusion. A handful murmured questions, but none ventured to voice them. The dual announcements, first from the cockpit, then repeated by the lead cabin attendant, created a curious stillness. The jet bridge remained locked to the terminal, and the external ground crew chatter seeped in through the open forward door, voices speaking urgently into headsets, the chug of tugs, the hiss of pneumatic brakes. Mrs. Parker stood paralyzed for a moment. She'd never been in this position before, her immaculate uniform in disarray, her authority under scrutiny. She felt her hands tremble and instinctively smoothed the lapels of her blazer. The intimidating presence she so carefully cultivated felt wobbly now, like a house of cards in a breeze. Ms. Parker, the senior purser, Carla Devlin, approached quietly. Carla's voice was measured. Will you come to the flight deck? The captain requests your presence. Ms. Parker took a breath, pinched the bridge of her nose, then straightened her shoulders. Of course, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She moved down the aisle with deliberate steps, every pair of eyes in first class watching her. Some were curious, some disapproving, and a few, particularly Tasha's row, looked on with cautious anticipation. At the cockpit door, Captain Monroe opened it himself, unusual but protocol given the circumstances. Ms. Parker, he said, voice low, please come in. She entered the cramped space, the smell of coffee and the soft glow of instruments greeting her. First Officer Chen tapped a button to lower the sun visor, giving them privacy. Carla Devlin remained outside, both as witness and guard to ensure nothing untoward occurred. Monroe closed the door behind Ms. Parker and turned to face her. He spoke with the calm authority of a commander. Ms. Parker, the FAA has held us on the ground due to a reported violation of passenger treatment protocols involving a minor. I need your full cooperation. I have been instructed to have you make a public apology to the passenger in question, Ms. Tasha Brooks, and to the cabin. Ms. Parker's breath caught. The words were like ice water. She heard them, but struggled to process. Her professional reputation, built over decades of flawless service, was at stake. A public apology in front of dozens of first-class passengers and the entire cabin crew? It was unthinkable. Yet, Captain Monroe's eyes conveyed neither anger nor mockery, only a steely adherence to duty. She nodded, her throat tight. Yes, Captain, I understand. Monroe placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, something he had never done before. Remember, you must be sincere. The FAA requires an explanation for your actions, and Miss Brooks deserves to hear the truth. You will address the cabin gathered in the first-class cabin, and Miss Brooks will have the opportunity to ask any questions. Ms. Parker swallowed, and her mind flashed to Tasha sitting alone in 12A, hands clasped in her lap, pale but resolute. She remembered refusing to look at the boarding pass, her arrogance. She remembered instructing Tasha with that cold tone, "Please, move to the rear cabin." And she remembered the shame in the girl's eyes. "Thank you, Captain," Ms. Parker whispered, steeling herself. She exited the flight deck as Carla Devlin opened the curtain to the first-class cabin. A hush fell over the cabin as Ms. Parker stepped into the aisle. The passengers shifted in their seats, polite confusion on their faces. Some quietly reached for their phones, perhaps recording. Others leaned forward, anticipation flickering in their eyes. Ms. Parker cleared her throat, her voice unexpectedly soft but carrying with surprising clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "may I have your attention, please?" The murmur died down instantly. Even the soft clink of cutlery and the gentle hum of air vents seemed to pause. "I stand before you today to address an incident involving one of our passengers." Her gaze flicked briefly to the forward curtain, then to where Tasha sat in economy. Ms. Tasha Brooks, age 16, traveling alone with a valid first-class ticket for seat 3B. She paused, swallowing. The weight of the moment settled in. Here she was, an experienced senior flight attendant admitting fault publicly. "Earlier, I asked Miss Brooks to relinquish her seat and move to the rear cabin. I did so without just cause. I made an erroneous judgment about her eligibility to occupy first class, and I failed to verify her ticket properly before insisting she relocate. For that, I owe Miss Brooks, and all of you, an apology." She lifted her gaze, looking each passenger in the eye, her expression earnest. "I deeply regret the actions I took. As a representative of this airline and as someone entrusted with passenger care, I should have treated Ms. Brooks with the respect and dignity every customer deserves. I am sincerely sorry." Silence echoed through the cabin for a heartbeat. Then a faint round of shuffling. No applause, no cheering, just the quiet sound of passengers absorbing her words. Ms. Parker felt her throat clench as she fought back tears she had not expected. At the same moment, Captain Monroe's voice crackled softly over the cabin PA. "Thank you, Ms. Parker. Passengers, we appreciate your patience during this matter. We will remain at the gate until the FAA completes its review. If you have any questions, please address a flight attendant." Ms. Parker turned her attention to the curtain leading to economy, where Tasha's calm profile was illuminated by the ambient light. She hesitated, then walked down the aisle toward the dividing curtain. As she stepped through, she met Tasha's gaze directly. Tasha sat upright, her phone still clutched in her lap. Her green journal lay closed on the tray table before her. She looked polished and composed despite the earlier ordeal, her resolve shining through the pale, determined set of her jaw. Miss Parker stopped in front of 12A. She took a deep breath and dropped to one knee to be at eye level with Tasha. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. "Miss Brooks, I understand you have questions. I am here to answer them truthfully." Tasha nodded, her blue eyes steady. "Yes." "Ms. Parker, I accept your apology, but I need to know why you thought I was unworthy of my seat. Why did you assume I didn't belong in first class?" Ms. Parker closed her eyes momentarily as if bracing herself. She opened them and met Tasha's gaze. "I judged you based on your appearance, your age, your youth. I assumed a 16-year-old traveling alone in first class must have somehow received special treatment or an improper upgrade. Rather than check the facts, I acted on my bias. That was wrong." She inhaled and continued, her voice thick with remorse. "I let my personal assumptions override the protocols we must follow. I allowed my own prejudice about a teenage girl to influence my actions. I am ashamed of that. You had every right to your seat and I robbed you of your dignity. For that, I am profoundly sorry." Tasha's posture softened slightly. She regarded Miss Parker with a mixture of sorrow and compassion. The cabin crew and a handful of economy passengers were watching. Miss Parker's sincerity was palpable, No one smiled or applauded. This was not a performance, but a moment of genuine contrition. A few passengers in first class exchanged glances. Mrs. Smith, seated in 2A, gave a small nod of approval. The middle-aged couple in 2B and 2C sat quietly, their eyes conveying that while the apology was overdue, it was at least heartfelt. Ms. Parker rose to her feet, brushing imaginary lint from her skirt. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make amends," she said softly. "I promise to learn from this and to ensure it never happens again." Tasha closed her journal and tucked it into her backpack. She looked around at the assembled faces, the passengers who had witnessed her humiliation, now watching her vindication. "Thank you," Tasha replied. Her voice, though calm, carried a quiet force. "I appreciate your apology, Ms. Parker. I accept it." The cabin remained silent, the only sound the soft click of the curtains sliding shut to conceal the cockpit. Then, as if on cue, the passengers returned to their own business. A man reached for his tablet, a woman resumed her in-flight magazine, and the attendants began clearing away empty glasses. But the mood had shifted. The earlier tension had melted into a shared understanding, a collective acknowledgement that power unchecked can wound, and that courage and truth have their own quiet strength. No one cheered, but eyes met with nods of respect. A few passengers offered faint smiles toward Tasha as they passed by, a gesture of solidarity without fanfare. As Ms. Parker returned to her duties, she caught Tasha's eye one last time and gave a small, grateful nod. Tasha responded with a lift of her chin, a sign that she, too, was moving forward from this ordeal. Captain Monroe's voice came over the PA once more. "Delta Ops has informed us that the FA's investigation is complete. We will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." The engines roared back to life and the cabin lights swelled back to their usual brightness. As the aircraft began its pushback, Tasha closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them to watch the runway lights glide by outside. In her pocket, she felt the reassuring weight of her phone and journal, a testament to the power of a single message. No applause had ever sounded in that cabin, but in the hush of moving air and reviving engine thrust, Tasha felt something deeper, an invisible applause of integrity and respect, echoing in the shared silence of strangers turned witnesses. And as the plane rolled forward, she knew she had reclaimed not only her seat, but her voice, and that sometimes the boldest act of all is to insist on being heard. Two uniformed figures emerged from the forward door of the jet bridge, their polished badges gleaming under the cabin lights. One was a tall man in a crisp FAA jacket, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. The other a woman whose stance conveyed both authority and impatience. Between them walked Mr. Randall Chambers, the airline's own operations supervisor, his company-issued blazer snug over his broad shoulder. Conversations dwindled to startled whispers as they made their way through first class, the passengers craning to see what could possibly warrant such an official escort. Ms. Parker stood near row 3, her back ramrod straight, uniform perfectly pressed but eyes wide with apprehension. She recognized the FAA insignia and the airline supervisor immediately. No comforting hint remained in their expressions. As the trio approached, the senior flight attendant's heartbeat quickened. She forced an even expression, lips pressed thin, and subconsciously ran a fingertip along her name tag. Every polished buckle and brass pin felt suddenly heavy with shame. The male FA agent spoke first, voice low but carrying unmistakable finality. "Ms. Parker, you're required to accompany us off the aircraft immediately. Under FAA Safety Regulation Section 3828.14, you are to be removed pending further investigation into the incident involving Ms. Brooks." His words echoed down the narrow aisle, silencing the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of in-flight magazines. A ripple of shock passed through the first-class cabin. Heads turned, eyebrows rose, and phones discreetly slid from pockets as passengers realized the gravity of what was unfolding. Mrs. Smith, seated just behind the vacant 3B, caught Tasha's eye. The older woman's lips parted slightly, and though her hands remained folded demurely in her lap, her fingers twitched in silent solidarity. Ms. Parker's cheeks paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but the FAA agent's calm stare stopped her words in midair. The female agent extended a gloved hand toward Ms. Parker's elbow. "Please, come with us," she said. The airline supervisor brought up the rear, his presence a reminder that the company itself supported the FAA's decision. Swallowing hard, Ms. Parker allowed herself to be guided forward. Each step felt like a milestone of humiliation. The click of her polished shoes against the aisle floor, the rustle of her uniform skirt as she moved. Passengers watched in stunned silence. Some exchanged glances. Others looked away, uneasy at witnessing the fall of a professional they had once regarded as an icon of airline service. As Ms. Parker passed by row after row, the stares she endured were relentless. A woman in 1C pressed her lips together, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The couple in 2A and 2C leaned toward each other, mouths moving in incredulous whispers. The cabin's plush surroundings, leather seats, embroidered pillows, had never felt so oppressive, so complicit in this moment of public disgrace. Tasha, sitting in economy mere rows behind, watched the procession unfold. She felt no satisfaction at Miss Parker's downfall, only a quiet sense of vindication. The memory of being forced from 3B came back sharply. The cold scanner light, the arrogant dismissal of her ticket, the excruciating hush of bystanders. Now, finally, justice had a face, and it walked her way in uniform. Mrs. Smith leaned closer to Tasha, whispering so softly that only the girl could hear. "You did the right thing, dear." Her voice quavered with admiration. No one else heard. No one else noticed this exchange. But in that moment, Tasha felt as though she sat with an unwavering ally. The older woman's whispered thanks warmed her from the inside out. The FAA agents guided Ms. Parker down the aisle and beyond the curtain that separated first class from premium economy. A hush fell over the entire cabin as the curtain swung back and forth, briefly revealing the solemn faces of the escorting officers. Flight attendants in the back rows watched with professional curiosity, their own uniforms crisp and untainted. A low murmur began among the premium economy passengers. Did they say she violated regulations? Was it really a minor involved? I saw a girl texting. Wonder what happened. The questions wove together into a tapestry of doubt, regret, and amazement. Even in these narrower seats, passengers turned to one another, sharing fragments of what they'd heard. At the front of economy class, Miss Parker paused at the final step before the jet bridge, her posture still rigid despite the quiver in her shoulders. The agents exchanged a brief glance. Protocol dictated no shackles, no harsh measures, but Miss Parker's eyes flicked downward, avoiding contact with any of the passengers. She seemed to shrink under the weight of so many vigilant gazes. Finally, she turned and stepped off the aircraft. The jet bridge doors swung closed behind her with a pneumatic hiss that echoed through the cabin like a verdict. All that remained was the fleeting image of her retreating form, flanked by the steadfast authority of federal regulation and corporate oversight. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then the cabin stirred. "Well, I suppose apologies aren't enough after all," whispered a gentleman in 4D, shaking his head in disbelief. Across the aisle, a mother muttered, "I should have spoken up. I should have said something." The realization settled in. They'd all stood by in silence, complicit in Ms. Parker's wrongdoing by their inaction. Another voice piped up from row 5. "That poor girl, she'll remember this forever." A couple in 6C echoed the sentiment. "She handled herself so well." Passengers shifted in their seats, some offering sympathetic glances toward the curtain beyond which Tasha waited. No longer was she invisible. She had become a catalyst for change, and the cabin's collective conscience stirred at her presence. Mrs. Smith angled her seat slightly, turning to face Tasha's row. Her voice was barely audible, a soft murmur of gratitude meant only for the girl. "Thank you," she said again, her eyes bright with unshed tears. In that private exchange, Tasha felt a profound connection, a reassurance that her courage had inspired more than she could have imagined. As the interim supervisor settled into row 1B to oversee the next steps, flight attendants resumed stowing carts and preparing for a delayed departure. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted from one of sterile luxury to something more human, a place where mistakes were acknowledged, accountability reigned, and empathy blossomed. Tasha closed her journal, its dark green cover warm under her fingertips. She carefully placed it back into her backpack and leaned her head against the window's chill glass. Outside, the tarmac lights glowed in the twilight, awaiting the plane's eventual departure. Inside, a chorus of hushed conversation swelled. Passengers spoke not of the weather nor of in-flight entertainment, but of dignity, justice, and the quiet power of a single young girl's resolve. Somewhere beyond the closed curtain, the captain awaited permission to proceed. But for the passengers on board, the true course had already been charted, a flight transformed by accountability, where the greatest service came not from plush seats or gourmet meals, but from the steadfast refusal to overlook injustice. And as the murmurs of apology and admiration wove through both cabins, Tasha closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of calm triumph, knowing that her voice, in whatever form, had made all the difference. Within 48 hours of the FAA's ground stop and the public apology, Delta Skyway's executive offices were a hive of crisis meetings. In the gleaming boardroom on the 20th floor of headquarters, CEO Margaret Liu sat at the head of a long glass table, flanked by her general counsel, the senior VP of operations, and the head of human resources. On a large screen behind them, the viral video played on loop. Grainy footage captured by a fellow passenger, showing Ms. Parker's rigid posture as she marched down the jet bridge, flanked by FAA agents. And then, the moment Ms. Parker knelt before Tasha, a public apology that now resonated worldwide. Margaret pressed a hand to her temple. "This isn't just a PR crisis," she said quietly, voice taut. "It's a systemic failure. We allowed an unchecked frontline employee to weaponize her authority against a minor." General Counsel Simon Patel cleared his throat. "From a legal standpoint, we need decisive action. There are federal regulations against passenger mistreatment, and the FAA has already opened an investigation. If we don't fire Ms. Parker, they'll do it for us, and the penalties could be severe." Across the table, HR Director Elena Rodriguez nodded. "I've reviewed her personnel file. Ms. Parker has 23 years of immaculate service, but this incident is unforgivable. Public trust in our brand is eroded. We must demonstrate that we hold every team member, regardless of seniority, to the highest standard." There was a long silence. Finally, Margaret stood and faced her team. Then it settled. "We terminate Ms. Parker's employment effective immediately. Simultaneously, we announce a comprehensive overhaul of our first-class boarding procedures and institute mandatory anti-bias training for all flight and ground staff worldwide." That afternoon, an internal memo was sent to every Delta Skyways employee. Subject: immediate termination and policy overhaul. Dear team, as of 1700 hours today, Ms. Laura Parker has been dismissed from Delta Skyways for conduct unbecoming of our values and in violation of federal passenger safety regulations. We deeply regret this incident and apologize to all affected, especially Ms. Tasha Brooks. Effective immediately, we are implementing the following measures. Enhanced first-class ticket verification. All first-class boarding passes will be scanned and visually verified by 2 team members, 1 flight attendant and 1 gate agent, prior to takeoff. Mandatory anti-bias and dignity training. Every Delta Skyways employee will attend a 1-day workshop on unconscious bias, passenger rights, and de-escalation techniques. Completion is required before the end of this quarter. Whistleblower hotline. We have established a confidential hotline for any employee or passenger to report concerns about crew conduct without fear of retaliation. We remain committed to ensuring every journey with Delta Skyways is safe, respectful, and dignified. Sincerely, Margaret Liu, CEO. Within hours, social media channels exploded. The hashtag Justice for Tasha began trending, accompanied by short clips of Ms. Parker's apology and the moment she was escorted off the plane. Thousands of retweets included captions such as, "A victory for every passenger who's ever felt powerless," and "This is what accountability looks like." Major news outlets picked up the story. The New York Times published an article titled, "Teen's Single Message Grounds Flight Forces Major Airline Shakeup," while CNN featured a segment on "When Authority Goes Too Far." In the midst of the frenzy, the video of Tasha descending the jet bridge stairs, head held high, small but resolute, became the emblem of the movement. It was recut into a 1-minute inspirational montage set to uplifting music with on-screen quotes. Courage isn't always loud. Fairness is everyone's right. Home voice can change the sky. By evening, that video had amassed over 10 million views across platforms. Celebrities and influencers reposted it. An Olympian praised Tasha's poise. A best-selling author wrote an open letter extolling her quiet heroism. And a leading child advocacy NGO retweeted the clip with the caption, "Empower every child to stand up for their rights." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., FAA Director Evelyn received calls from industry leaders praising her swift intervention. Her office scheduled a press conference for the following morning to announce new federal guidelines on in-flight passenger treatment and to formalize the requirement for airlines to adopt what she dubbed the Brooks Protocol, a set of steps to ensure no passenger, especially minors, could be forcibly removed from their rightful seat without due process. At home that evening, Tasha sat at her desk scrolling through the flood of supportive messages. She read stories from teenagers around the world who said they felt emboldened by her stand. Parents shared how they would now coach their children to use their voices. A school principal in London announced a roundtable on student rights, inspired by Tasha's example. Tears pricked her eyes as Mrs. Smith's final text appeared. "My dear child, I am so proud of your strength. The world is better for it." Tasha closed her laptop and opened her journal, writing a simple entry. April 30th, 2025. Today I learned that fairness can soar higher than any plane. I never expected my words to ripple across continents, but they have. Tomorrow I return to school, but I am not the same. I know what it means to stand up for myself and for others. By week's end, Delta Skyways' first-class verification protocol had been fully rolled out at all major hubs. Gate agents and flight attendants were seen scanning passes in tandem, confirming seat integrity twice before passengers boarded. Pilots announced over the PA, "As part of our commitment to your dignity and safety, our new boarding verification process is now complete. Thank you for flying Delta Skyways." In-flight service bulletins reminded crews, "Respect every passenger's right to their assigned seat. All disputes must be referred to senior management. Under no circumstances should a passenger under 18 be moved without parental consent or legal authority." The company's corporate training division conducted workshops that combined role-playing scenarios where attendants practiced de-escalation on mock passengers, with presentations from civil rights experts on implicit bias. Testimonials from employees who had once viewed biases unconsciously now acknowledged how easily assumptions could harm customers. One training slide became particularly memorable. Age, appearance, or attire do not determine worth. Every boarding pass is a contract of trust. Employees shared photos of themselves completing the training, posting with hashtags like Delta Dignity and Bias Ends Here. Industry competitors took notice. Several major carriers announced they too would review their policies. In the days that followed, news anchors often cut away from breaking stories with a brief reminder. Don't forget to check out Justice for Tasha on social media. Her courage is a reminder that every voice counts. Late-night talk show hosts invited Tasha's story into monologues about social change. Podcasters debated the implications of a child versus the system and praised her for holding a powerful company to account. Meanwhile, Ms. Parker, now unemployed, gave an exclusive interview, her first public remarks since being dismissed. Her tone was remorseful. I let my own biases cloud my judgment. I allowed protocol to be overshadowed by arrogance. I deeply regret how I treated Tasha. I hope she can forgive me, and I will spend the rest of my life learning from this. The interview aired alongside footage of the FAA's new guidelines and Delta's updated procedures, an unflinching portrait of personal and institutional accountability. On campus the following Monday, Tasha returned to the hallways of Brookside High School. Friends greeted her with cheers, teachers offered hugs. In her homeroom, Principal Ramirez asked her to share her experience. Tasha, he said, your actions changed the industry. What would you like to say to your classmates? She stood before the room, voice steady. If you ever see someone being treated unfairly, speak up, even if you're scared, even if it feels small. One message can ground a flight. One voice can shift a culture. Her words were met with applause, this time genuine, warm, and unmistakable. Weeks later, the viral video of Tasha descending the jet bridge remained a staple in classrooms and boardrooms alike. A nonprofit partnered with Delta Skyways to produce a short documentary, First Class to First Principles, tracing the incident from the moment Ms. Parker first approached Tasha to the final policy changes. Screened at airports as part of employee orientation, it concluded with Tasha's line, "Fairness doesn't fly on autopilot. It takes someone willing to step up." In the epilogue, footage played of children around the world reenacting Tasha's calm but unwavering walk down the jet bridge stairs. Each step a symbol of dignity reclaimed. As the documentary credits rolled, a simple message appeared. Be the change you wish to see. Every passenger, every person, every day. What began as a routine flight had catalyzed an international dialogue on respect, authority, and the power of one young person's voice. Ms. Parker's dismissal served as a stark reminder that seniority does not confer impunity. Delta Skyways' policy overhaul demonstrated how organizations can transform failure into an opportunity for growth, and Tasha's viral descent down those metal steps became an enduring emblem of fairness. Proof that sometimes the quietest actions resonate the loudest. Months after that fateful flight, Tasha settled back into the rhythms of everyday life. She no longer felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach when she saw an airplane wing out her window. Boarding felt ordinary again. She offered her boarding pass with a calm smile, knowing that this time there would be no question of her seat or her dignity. On her very next trip, as she stepped into first class, a different flight attendant greeted her by name. Before reaching for her carry-on, the attendant paused and said softly, "Miss Brooks, I want you to know I read about you. Because of your courage, our whole team learned new standards of service." Her eyes shone with genuine respect. Tasha nodded gratefully, moved by the sincerity in that simple acknowledgement. Meanwhile, In Washington, D.C., Evelyn Brooks stood at the podium of the annual FAA Safety Summit, the room packed with regulators, airline executives, and advocacy groups. Behind her, a slide displayed the title Passenger Rights and Anti-Bias Protocols, alongside a still frame from Tasha's descent down the jet bridge stairs. Clearing her throat, Evelyn spoke with authority. Processes. Today we formalize the Brooks policy, a mandate that every U.S. carrier implement comprehensive anti-bias training, strengthen ticket verification processes, and establish clear rights for all passengers, especially minors traveling alone. Discrimination has no place at 30,000 feet. The audience responded with sustained applause, and news cameras captured the moment. Press releases the next morning quoted Evelyn's closing words: "Every passenger deserves respect as part of their ticket contract. We will hold our industry to that standard." Back at Brookside High School, Tasha found her story woven into classroom discussions. In civics class, her photograph appeared on a PowerPoint slide under the heading Youth Civic Engagement. Fellow students debated the responsibilities of bystanders and the power of nonviolent protest. In the community center, a local nonprofit organized a workshop titled Taking Flight, Advocacy and Equity, where Tasha was invited to speak about standing up for her rights. Parents shared how they now coached their children to speak up if they ever felt mistreated. Teachers assigned her story as an example of modern heroism. Even in neighborhood book clubs, members found themselves reflecting on authority, empathy, and how a single teenager's quiet insistence on fairness could reshape policies at the highest levels. For Tasha, the greatest reward was simply living without fear. As she gazed out the airplane window on her next departure, she spotted the contrails of other jets streaking across a cloudless sky and smiled. The world had taught her that even the smallest voice, when used with conviction, can change the way people and entire industries treat one another. And that knowledge gave her a freedom far greater than any seat assignment could ever provide. In the ever-evolving tapestry of human interaction, it is often the quietest threads that, when woven with intention and courage, hold the greatest strength. The story of a young girl who refused to speak in the face of injustice and instead let her silence become a clarion call for accountability reminds us that power is not always measured in volume or aggression. In fact, silence, when deployed with purpose, can serve as a potent assertion of self-respect and a catalyst for systemic change. From the boardrooms of multinational corporations to the corridors of local schools, the principle remains the same. Every individual, regardless of age, appearance, or station, deserves to have their rights recognized and safeguarded. Moreover, a single, timely intervention, whether a phone call, a note, or a steadfast refusal to comply with an unjust demand, can become the fulcrum upon which entire institutions pivot toward fairness. In our culture, we frequently equate strength with speech. The louder the voice, the more commanding the presence. Yet silence can speak volumes. When a person calmly refuses to comply with an unfair demand, that act of refusal becomes a visible spotlight on the wrongdoing itself. In the case of Tasha, the teenage passenger, her silence was not acquiescence, but a deliberate refusal to validate Ms. Parker's authority. It forced those around her and the broader airline system to confront the injustice. This kind of strategic silence can be a form of resistance, a nonviolent refusal to collude with systems built on prejudice or bias. By withholding cooperation, the individual transforms a moment of personal indignity into an opportunity for collective reflection. At its core, the principle at play is simple. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity. International human rights instruments, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, enshrine this concept. They assert that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. In practical terms, This means that appearances, whether related to age, race, attire, or status, should never dictate who is worthy of respect. When a flight attendant judges a 16-year-old passenger unworthy of a first-class seat, it violates this foundational tenet. In everyday life, too, we encounter scenarios where people are dismissed because of their clothes, their accents, or their youth. Upholding universal dignity requires that we recognize such dismissals for what they are, prejudice rather than protocol, and challenge them. Implicit bias lurks beneath conscious awareness. We all carry mental shortcuts, associations between certain appearances and particular traits that can lead to discriminatory behavior. Ms. Parker's assumption that a teenager could not legitimately occupy a premium seat exemplifies how implicit bias can override even formal procedures. To counteract this, organizations must invest in bias awareness training, exposing employees to scenarios that illuminate their subconscious prejudices. Individuals, too, can engage in self-reflection. Whenever we experience a moment of judgment, "She's too young," "He looks like he can't afford this," we can pause and ask ourselves if we're responding to policy or prejudice. In doing so, we help build a culture in which everyone has the right to equal treatment, not as a corporate slogan, but as a lived reality. While silence can stop an unjust act in its tracks, sometimes it must be paired with a timely intervention. A single phone call to the proper authority can transform frustration into resolution. In Tasha's case, texting the FAA director bypassed Ms. Parker's local authority and activated a higher level of oversight. This principle applies broadly. When we notice misconduct, be it in the workplace, in public spaces, or online, we can escalate it responsibly. Whether it's calling a manager about a coworker's harassment, contacting the police in the event of violence, or reporting cyberbullying to a platform, timely reporting ensures that the right people are alerted before harm compounds. Intervening at the precise moment prevents small injustices from snowballing into systemic abuses. Civics textbooks often portray change as the domain of mass movements and grand speeches. Yet history is also replete with examples of individuals whose seemingly small acts precipitated sweeping reforms. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her bus seat, Malala Yousafzai's insistence on her right to education, and Tasha's simple choice to remain seated and send a text all illustrate how personal courage can disrupt entrenched systems. The crucial element is that these acts did not exist in isolation. They resonated with a broader public, inspiring solidarity and amplifying calls for justice. When each of us understands that our everyday choices, speaking up against a well-placed insult, refusing to participate in gossip, or simply listening empathetically, can inspire others, we unlock the latent power of collective action. Organizations, whether airlines, schools, or corporations, function through layers of policy and culture. Changing an institution often demands both top-down reforms and bottom-up activism. Tasha's stand triggered a cascade of responses: an FAA directive, a corporate overhaul of bias training, and a viral video that reshaped public expectations. This model of change underscores a vital insight. Institutional practices change when individuals insist on accountability. Employees at every level can wield this power by documenting incidents, following formal complaint procedures, and engaging allies. Likewise, consumers can vote with their wallets and their voices, supporting companies that uphold dignity and boycotting those that fail to do so. Individual agency, when exercised with clarity and purpose, becomes the engine driving institutional transformation. A system free from discrimination does not emerge spontaneously. It must be cultivated. In every setting, classroom, boardroom, or digital forum, we can foster norms that prize respect above deference to authority. Leaders play a crucial role by modeling inclusive behavior, acknowledging mistakes, soliciting feedback, and punishing misconduct impartially. Simultaneously, community members reinforce these values by intervening when they witness injustice. For example, in a meeting where someone is interrupted repeatedly, a bystander can say, "Please, let her finish," thereby shifting the dynamic. Over time, these micro-interventions accumulate, creating an environment where dignity is woven into the fabric of daily life, rather than treated as an afterthought. Stories humanize abstract principles. When Tasha's story circulated on social media and news outlets, it put a face and a voice to the abstract right of equitable treatment. Educators can harness such narratives to spark conversations about bias, courage, and systemic reform. In literature circles, students might analyze the motivations behind Ms. Parker's actions. In civics classes, they could debate the proper scope of regulatory intervention. Workshops and seminars can invite participants to reenact the scenario, exploring alternative courses of action and reflecting on their own potential biases. By embedding these discussions into the curriculum, communities ensure that the lessons of one flight reverberate through generations. One of the most inspiring aspects of Tasha's experience is that it centers on youth agency. Young people possess a unique blend of moral clarity and technological savvy. They understand the mechanics of social media advocacy and the power of hashtags, while still maintaining an idealism adults often shelve under pragmatism. Encouraging youth to step into leadership roles through student councils, civic clubs, or community projects amplifies their capacity to affect change. Mentorship programs can pair them with activists and public sector professionals, offering guidance on navigating bureaucracies. In doing so, society not only empowers its youngest members, but also taps into fresh perspectives that can rejuvenate stale institutional cultures. True transformation occurs when the immediate crisis yields permanent safeguards. The Brooks Protocol, mandating explicit anti-bias measures and robust ticket verification, illustrates how a single event can crystallize into enduring policy. Organizations and regulators can adopt an after-action review approach, analyzing incidents to extract lessons and codify improvements. This might involve setting up independent oversight boards, soliciting anonymous feedback from frontline staff, and conducting regular audits of equity practices. By converting courageous acts into structural safeguards, we ensure that tomorrow's injustices are thwarted before they reach the public eye. The lessons drawn from a single flight cabin extend far beyond 35,000 feet. In every arena of life, public transportation, healthcare, education, digital communities, the same principles hold. Silence, when wielded as resistance. Timely intervention, when bias threatens. And the unwavering defense of dignity, regardless of appearances, can transform systems. Our task as individuals and as communities is to translate these insights into daily practice. We can start by examining our own assumptions, preparing ourselves to speak out or intentionally remain silent when it matters, and supporting those who choose courage over compliance. In the end, the power of a small act lies not only in its immediate impact, but in the ripples it generates. A single message, a refusal to stand down, can cascade into regulatory reforms, corporate policy shifts, and educational curricula that honor the inherent worth of every person. When we recognize that each voice, no matter how soft, can resonate across continents, we embrace a vision of society in which respect and justice are not privileges granted by birth or wealth, but inalienable rights shared by all. Let us carry forward that vision, honoring the strength of silence, safeguarding universal dignity, and believing wholeheartedly that timely courage can, indeed, change the world.